2.5 hours talk for the sake of confusing me. This is what he thought. And I haven't seen an awful lot of people, McNamara is the great exception, who've gone around saying during that whole time, we were simply feeding American journalists and American surveyors stuff we knew wasn't true.
I think it's greatly to the credit of the United States that the government felt it had to lie to the people about this war from the beginning. My main regret is I didn't do more than I did to help the anti-war movement. It's still, what little I did do is still a great cause of pride to me, but I think, and I'm not searching for common ground in saying this, believe me, but I should have thought that one thing we do perhaps share is a feeling that widespread distrust in the government isn't a bad thing. The fact that there was great disillusionment at that point may have struck you then as being a defeat, but surely, from a conservative point of view, there must have been something salutary about it.
I keep saying...
The presumption is that the state is in the business of aggrandizing its power and ought to be watched. But the presumption taken to a certain point blinds you if, in fact, you simply refuse to listen to what is being said and then make your own evaluation. Barry Goldwater went over there. I saw him the day he came back. He's a pretty experienced fellow. And he thought, this was 1967, he thought that the enemy couldn't continue to sustain the casualties it did. Now, that's a reasonable thing to say. You might have been said that, don't be said, there will never be any lack of people who will rise up and volunteer to commit suicide on behalf of a free Vietnam. You'd have been right, but it would have been romantic for me to assume that you were right.
The image of the anti-war protesters is the caftans, the self-indulgence of fornication and so forth. But civil rights, quite different. Marches, the March on Montgomery, Martin Luther King modeling himself on Gandhi, thrown in jail, he says unearned suffering is redemptive. Now, the civil rights movement was concretized in the Civil Rights Acts. And the big Civil Rights Acts of 64 and 68, 65 actually is when it was enacted in 68. The big hullabaloo was over the act as it was coming to a vote in 64. Barry Goldwater opposed it. I flipped through old copies of the magazine you edited at the time, National Review, and National Review speaks of the act in language that is in places just dripping with disdain. Why did you oppose that act?
Well, we opposed that act on the grounds that it asked for constitutional liberties in an age in which constitutional liberties were being mobilized for this cause and that, rather with abandon. And we saw them addressing a situation which we doubted could be addressed in that way. But I have a very full perspective on life in the South in those days, and it was life that simply assumed that whatever headway blacks made would be made within their own culture, and that federal interposition would be simply a renewal of the Civil War. That was wrong, but that perception was very, very engaging.
And at what stage did you decide that it was wrong? What I'm interested in, did the movement itself change your thinking and that of your family?
No, what changed it was 10 or 15 years after it had passed. I said to myself, I don't think those constitutional arguments on which we relied were misspoken, nor do I think them opportunistic. But we got here a situation in which a better thing happens than would have happened by orderly pursuit of a constitutional decorum. I feel the same way about getting to the war against Hitler. I think it was full of deception, hypocrisy. I think that Roosevelt did things entirely different from what he intended, and I'm glad he did.
You look with clear distaste on the protests that you saw from the 14th floor of your hotel in Chicago in 1968. But you grant that the civil rights movement, that aspect of the 1960s, represents an achievement and a noble moment in American history.
No, I don't think so.
You don't?
I think the nature of what they did was anti-thought, anti-rational, the kind of thing that caused Socrates to leave seminars, the demagogy.
All right. What did you make of the civil rights movement?
Well, I couldn't phrase it better than you did. I mean, it seemed to me that it was the summa, really, especially Dr. King's leadership, of what it was to take part in the movement that we called the 60s. And I think probably the crucial moment for me, and I remember it very well, was when Dr. King, in his address at Riverside Church, said that despite enormous lectures from the black establishment, and the white liberal establishment too, he was no longer going to remain silent about the Vietnam War because, and here's my third point about that war, as well as about the movement, all the energy that should have gone to the repair of legal racism and poverty in the South, legally enforceable poverty and racism in the South, was going on the war. I mean, Johnson immolated his great society for that war. And the connection between the two seemed so strong and self-evident as to be, well, with me still.
Lyndon Johnson broke his hump getting the civil rights bill through Congress.
No, but it broke his hump doing that precisely, and broke his heart and other bits of his anatomy, and other people's as well, in Indochina, and destroyed what had been going to be the advertised Great Society. Now, we talk about lawlessness and the rest of it,
right.
The 60s, the contempt for law. What we only suspected then has been amply demonstrated since, that there was really quite high-level collusion with crime and disorder and subversion and provocation by those who were sworn to uphold it.
By J. Edgar Hoover, Kennedy listening
yes,
in.
Absolutely. By bugging, by planting agent provocateur, by stirring up incidents of violence, by circulating false racist propaganda.
Were the Black Panthers justified in engaging in violence?
Well, here's another self-criticism. At the time, I certainly would have said yes, and did say so, because I thought it was very stirring, and I don't take all of this back either, that there were blacks who didn't ask for anybody's permission anymore. They didn't wait until the moment was ripe. They didn't wait until there was a liberal consensus. They said, we want to do it on our own, and we have a perfect right to do that. That struck me as a good thing. And though it led to awful consequences in the case of the Black Panthers, to gangsterism and so forth, I remember being more impressed by it now than I think I probably should have been, to the extent even of saying
more impressed by what?
By that kind of black style, and by its courage, and also to make the full self-criticism, not recognizing that King was the real revolutionary. In other words, thinking of him as really the moderate in the thing, whereas when you look back on it, he was the one who really took it on the chin, as well as, still in his 30s, risking his life almost every day and refusing to threaten anybody else's for the rights of his own people, so to speak, but also saying that moral statements had to be made about the war and about nuclear weaponry.
You saw even the civil rights movement through the prism of Vietnam and this Trotskyite vision
very
of the
difficult
global
not
struggle.
to see it that way, because I certainly think, and Mr. Buckley in a way confirms it, that those who were on the other side saw the two things as somewhat linked as well, as a challenge to a certain ruling order. Yeah.
Your statement is that they were seen by those on the other side, we have a representative of those on the other side right here, as a conjoined
Yes.
challenge to the established order.
Yeah. So the George Wallace-Curtis LeMay joint candidacy was, in other words, absolutely perfect. The man who'd said, we will level every work of man in Vietnam, the head of the Bomber Command, and the man who said he would stand in the schoolhouse door.
Yeah, without coming up with the placenta that fed the two movements and suggested that they were the same, I think it's true that the same people viewed the two phenomena as in a sense linked, i.e. they were the causes of that time, and they drew the sympathies of the same kind of people. Meanwhile, the conservatives were saying there are understandable strategic reasons for doing something about Vietnam, and in respect of the civil rights question, we have to recognize that progress goes slowly, and that progress has to build on the good nature of the community.
Final question on each of these issues. Civil rights, you view that as a noble moment in American history. And you, Bill, what would your formulation...
Yes, I'm impressed by how conventional a view that now is in some ways, yes. I mean, because I think...
Well, Bill's about to be
its
unconventional.
baptism may have masked from people how noble it really was.
What would your formulation be?
My formulation was that the civil rights programs were a formulaic response to a real need, and not by any means one that has proved as successful as an alternative means might have been.
And on Vietnam, Bill, a century hence, will the American involvement in Vietnam be seen to have done any good at all?
I think it might be viewed historically as an act of constancy. We had said that we were going to live by the doctrine of containment, and we did our best. We prevailed in Korea, we prevailed in Berlin, we prevailed in Greece, and we didn't prevail there, but we gave the right signal, that they might say.
And your view, a century hence, how will that war be seen?
Much more as a crime than a mistake or a blunder, much more consciously committed, and as having done much more damage to American democracy than was recognized at the time, as well as having betrayed even the Vietnamese in whose name, the American allied Vietnamese, in other words, in whose name the war was conducted, as a complete, all-round textbook disaster and crime.
Christopher Hitchens, William F. Buckley, Jr., thank you very much.